Zohran Mamdani is New York's best choice for mayor.
Mamdani, are you going to support him?
I have learned a long time ago, let New York politics be New York politics. We got enough challenges in Jersey. I got a governor's race. I'm supporting Mikey Sherrill. I got legislative races. That's where my energy is going to go going into November. New York City, I love you. You're my neighbor. You're about 10 miles from where I live. You guys figure out your elections. I'm going to focus on mine.
You just heard from two Senate Democrats who likely plan to run for president in 2028. And even though that election is years away and we still don't know if we'll have free and fair elections by then, we're already kind of starting to see this shadow primary take place. And Zohran Mamdani's win in New York has forced some of the party's presidential hopefuls to show their cards a little bit early, and they're not very happy about that. Now, the way that he's basically forcing them to show their cards is by seeing whether or not they're going to endorse him, because that has implications for their position on Israel. So if they support Mamdani, they could alienate powerful pro-Israel donors like AIPAC. But if they don't endorse Mamdani, then they're definitely going to alienate the base, who they need to win if they plan to run for president in 2028. So a lot of them are trying to just avoid the topic like the plague. Not all of them are able to do that, though, because they're asked about it, as Cory Booker was. But with regard to Elizabeth Warren, you can see that she's really leaning into Mamdani, because for her, I think that she views this as her chance at redemption, because in the last two presidential primaries, she turned off a lot of progressive voters by fence-sitting for too long. In 2016, she waited until after the primary was over to endorse Hillary Clinton, even though we all knew that she was more ideologically aligned with Bernie Sanders. Now in 2020, she refused to endorse him again, even after she herself had no chance of winning. Bernie Sanders was the best chance at progressive stopping Biden at Super Tuesday, or on Super Tuesday, I should say. And after all the centrist Democrats coalesced around Biden, Elizabeth Warren chose to stay in the race, split the votes with Bernie Sanders and her, and ended up coming in third in her own state. So in my view, I think that her endorsement of Mamdani feels like an attempt for her to right that wrong, and she's broadcasting her intent to occupy the left-wing lane of the 2028 primary with this endorsement. I think she's trying to build a relationship with Mamdani so she can get his endorsement later on. But when it comes to Cory Booker, as you saw, he would not touch that race with a 10-foot pole like the coward that he is, even though, as people have pointed out, he's previously expressed support for the vote blue no matter who philosophy. But unfortunately for him, he is one of the most beholden Democrats to AIPAC. He was one of 16 Senate Democrats to vote against blocking arms sales to Israel, and we all know it's because he is completely bought and paid for by the Israel lobby. And Crystal Ball shared this headline from The Intercept, where he bragged about texting back and forth with the president of AIPAC like teenagers. So if you expect to maintain that relationship with AIPAC and other pro-Israel donors, you simply cannot endorse a candidate like Mamdani, who's explicitly critical of Israel's genocide, especially after he said he'd arrest Netanyahu if he came to New York. But the problem for genocide-supporting Democrats like Cory Booker is that they really relied on these smears against candidates like Mamdani of being anti-Semitic. But now those smears simply don't work. In fact, Mamdani actually has a substantial lead with Jewish voters in New York City. Furthermore, a Data for Progress poll shows that his support for Palestinian human rights actually helped him in his campaign, with 62% of voters saying that it swayed their vote. And his stance on Israel had popular support across the board. 79% of New York City Democrats want to restrict weapons to Israel, 78% believe it's a genocide, and 63% want Netanyahu arrested. And these numbers aren't unique to New York City. The Democratic base has shifted substantially on this issue, especially young voters, which is why AIPAC Democrats like Cory Booker, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and others, they get so uncomfortable whenever Mamdani's name comes up, because they know that they are hemorrhaging support every time they're asked to endorse him, but they refuse to. Nonetheless, they can't endorse him because they're siding with their donors over voters, because they basically view Mamdani as an existential threat. And they're not necessarily wrong, but as journalist Ken Klippenstein pointed out, Hakeem Jeffries strongly believes that he can't become House Speaker if Mamdani wins his election. Now, maybe it's because it'll signal that his style of pro-genocide politics has lost public support. Maybe it's because pro-Israel donors are threatening to withhold support from the party if leadership doesn't get this anti-Israel sentiment under control. I don't know. Either way, Mamdani's race is shaping up to be a proxy battle between the establishment and progressive wings of the Democratic Party, and it ties directly into the Israel-Palestine issue. And a lot of 2028 presidential hopefuls, they don't want to be forced to take a stance now before they see who ends up winning this war within the party. And you might say they kind of already have taken a stance by not taking a stance, because, I mean, Cory Booker has already clearly showed his cards, right? But you have to understand that he's not the only potential 2028 contender who's dealing with the reality that their support for the genocidal Israeli state is going to be a liability for them in 2028. So the pro-Israel Democrats have cooked up a plan to respond to the base's recent shift on Israel. As CNN reports, they're trying to throw Netanyahu under the bus in hopes to salvage their pro-Israel position. Edward Isaac Dover reports, fearing Zionism could die among Democrats, many party leaders are explicitly breaking with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to try to stop anti-Israel attitudes from becoming a litmus test for next year's midterms and the 2028 presidential primaries. But privately, several tell CNN they worry it may be too late. Nonetheless, that hasn't stopped them from doing damage control. In a write-up in the New York Times about the Democratic Party's strained relationship with Netanyahu, they quote one of the most bloodthirsty genocide supporters in Congress, Richie Torres, who says that he doesn't think that the relationship between the Democratic Party and Israel is irreparably harmed, but he does believe that the relationship between the Democratic Party and Netanyahu is. So this is how they're navigating this, because they feel like Israel is turning into a partisan issue, and they don't want to be perceived to be siding with Republicans on what is now a partisan issue. So if they can pawn the genocide off on Netanyahu, they hope that that's going to preserve support for the state of Israel after he's out of the picture. But even they know that the writing might already be on the wall, because more people increasingly understand that it's not just about the genocide currently. Of course, that is our utmost concern. But Israel is an ethno-state overseeing a modern-day apartheid system, which is incompatible with a bloc of voters who oppose colonialism and support social justice. And the base just isn't going to go for that now that their eyes have been opened. And things have shifted so quickly that the Zionist Democrats in the party actually fear that the party is leaving them behind. And I say this because the New York Times continues, nationwide, a Gallup poll released this week found that approval of Israel's military actions in Gaza has plummeted to 8% among Democrats. By contrast, 71% of Republicans say they approved of the country's military action in the enclave. And more generally, nearly 70% of Democrats expressed an unfavorable view of Israel compared to 37% of Republicans in a poll released by Pew Research Center in April. In 2022, 53% of Democrats and 27% of Republicans held negative views of Israel. Already, some pro-Israel Democrats are quietly wondering whether they will have any representation on the 2028 presidential primary debate stage, or if support for the country, however nuanced, will be regarded as a liability. And I'm here to let them know that it absolutely will be regarded as a liability. So they either adapt and repudiate their support for Israel's genocide and apartheid, or they get left behind. And look, I'm not wish-casting this, because an IMEU poll found that 29% of Biden 2020 voters who chose to not vote for Kamala said that Gaza was their top issue. So if so much had already changed by November of 2024, where this was that big of a liability for Kamala, by 2028, I can only imagine how toxic Israel is going to be for Democratic Party leaders. And best believe, everything these genocide-supporting Democrats like Cory Booker and Alyssa Slott can say, it is going to come back to bite them in 2028. And you can already see them trying to do damage control right now, but we're watching very closely, and we're not going to forget. But when you step back, it's easy to see how monumental Mamdani's victory has already been, because it's not just a turning point in the proxy war between progressives and the establishment wing of the party. It signals a total realignment on this issue of Israel-Palestine, and we're seeing a new status quo start to emerge right now. And Mamdani isn't the only one forcing 2028 hopefuls to show their cards, because Omar Fateh, a young progressive running for mayor in Minneapolis, won the endorsement of DFL, which is the state Democratic Party there. Yet Tim Walz decided to endorse the centrist incumbent Jacob Frey over Fateh. And that's something that he's going to have to explain in 2028 if he plans to run for president. And he's also going to explain his silence on the genocide in Gaza as well. We're all paying very close attention, and we will not let anyone off the hook. So right now, lines are being drawn, and right now is the time for all of us to make our standards known to anybody who wants to be the standard bearer of the Democratic Party come 2028. And to those who are already screeching about purity tests and accusing people like myself of helping Republicans by criticizing Democrats, I need you to shut the fuck up. Seriously, shut the fuck up. If you think that it's inappropriate to criticize Democrats 3 fucking years out from the primary when the party's popularity is at a 3-decade low, you are the ones helping Republicans. We cannot defeat fascists without a strong, principled Democratic Party, and forcing one of 2 viable parties to have basic moral standards, that's not unreasonable, okay? Purging genocide supporters from the party is good, actually, and if you disagree with that, you're part of the problem. So we're going to continue to make it known that yes, there will be a litmus test, a purity test, or whatever you want to call it. And if these Democrats expect to make it through a primary, they've got to pass those fucking tests. Otherwise, they're going to get kicked to the curb.